The Pod Barber. Coming up on today's show.
I was doing a stint in emergency medicine. I was working in casualty, and I remember the nurse calling me as Dr. Kundai, come, you have someone on the phone for you. And so I picked up the phone, and this lady says, first, please can you confirm for me how you spell your last name? I'm like, I spelled it for her. And can you confirm your first name? Do you have any middle? I said, what is this about? She's like, this is for your plane ticket. I'm like, for what? She's like, you're going to San Francisco for what? Oh, for your training. In what? In HIV. I'm like, for who are you? I mean, who? I've got a job here. Oh, I'm so sorry. I think someone forgot to give you a call. You're supposed to have been called because you're going to be working with us in the opportunistic infections clinic. And so to prepare you for that, we are sending you for training in HIV medicine. So that's how I got my job in HIV. I didn't apply for it.
You're listening to The Pod Barber. I'm championing the chat, proving conversation is the cure to better mental health and well-being. Meet my guests from all walks of life, showing vulnerability and sharing wisdom. Sit in on my chats and be part of reality entertainment. Join the Pod Barber tribe. Subscribe, share and like people. Feel the sonic positivity we're pumping right at you. You, my friends, are not alone. Who's next, please? Well, I'll tell you who. We are graced in the wonderful company of Dr. Kundai Chinyenze, Executive Director for Clinical Development working for IAVI, recently arrived in the UK, bringing her talent and experience, her family to our fine island, exponentially improving the mood of all who benefit her wisdom and passion. Welcome to the Pod Barber Show, Kundai.
Thank you. That's a great intro. Thank you, Mick. Glad to be here.
We just discussed the fact that I write poems. We call them noodles here. So here goes yours. Families are broken, dying to a killer disease called AIDS. Finding the cure to change the story, or it just replays. Life's a game of poker, you play the cards you're dealt. Stick, twist or bust, make your move if you wish to help. Kundai Chinyenze, an African flower of hope. Perennially budding, your faith helped you cope. Telling your story of war versus HIV, how hard you've fought. With new ears to listen, to share your message, hope and support. In this strange old world, we need one global community based on compassion, love, respect and empathy. We're all brothers and sisters despite our plight. Stand shoulder to shoulder to help good win this fight.
Wow, Mick, that's really incredible. I've actually never heard myself being described like that, so I'm not sure I recognize myself in that poem, but that was beautiful. Very humbling as well, but also you never look at yourself in that way, right? But thank you.
It's obviously great to have you here in the show. Tell us a little bit about how you've ended up in Saffron Walden.
I don't know where to begin. We moved here last year in September from Nairobi, Kenya, and just trying to look for beautiful parts of England to settle in. And we found this beautiful, quiet, not so little town, but probably by comparison to Nairobi, yes, a little town. And great place. We thought would be wonderful for the family and the kids. Great school nearby. So it's just a good fit. Yeah.
And everyone settled in. The boys are both in school.
Yes. It took a while, of course, was during the lockdown. So they were learning from home and not really meeting their peers. So it took a while for them to integrate with the school. But eventually, I think they've settled in now, getting into the swing of things. And
Enoch, your husband, another fine man, he's got himself work now as well, hasn't he? And everything's sort of settling.
Yes, everything's settling. So he's back doing his climate work, and which is very exciting given the current times. And and I'm continuing with my work.
I know you're on a bit of a break now. You've got a week off. So
yes.
What have you got planned?
I'm going to visit the Peak District.
Nice.
So I've heard so much about this, and I'm very excited. Can't wait. I'm an outdoors person, so we're definitely going to do some beautiful hikes. I'm told it's going to be lovely. So yeah, looking forward to that.
Exactly. The benefit of being out in the wilderness, and that particularly that part of the country, is you haven't got to go a long way from here. You've got just amazing sort of landscapes and vistas, and you'd have been used to big country, so you'll be restored. Your few days off will be more than pleasurable. So I want to get started on the base of the story, where this all starts. So tell us about your childhood history, where you're from, your early memories.
Yeah, so I was born in Zimbabwe. So do women give their age? I don't mind. I was born in 1978. I lived in Harare with my parents. I had a sort of middle class upbringing for most of my childhood, that is, until I recall my father losing his job and my mom sort of working to support the family. And she was very passionate about my education. She pretty much mortgaged the whole family to get me to go to a really good school. As part of her work, she was part of sort of the waste management team in the local council, and they used to visit schools to make sure, they have all their systems in place. And she visited this one school, and she fell in love with it. It was a girls' school, but was really, great education. They always used to have the best results in the country. And she thought, I was an only child. I want to have my child learn here. She used to think I was so smart and I could do anything. So she wanted me to get the best, but it was really expensive. And I remember the family, we had to move out of the house that we lived in, and we actually moved into the garage so that she could try and afford the fees. I think she got a lot of help from her brothers now and again, but it was really tough for the family to sort of put me through school. So that was, sort of growing up. And I remember going to school with all these very rich, wealthy kids and having a tough time sort of getting to reveal who my true self was. My family lives in a garage for me to be able to come to school and trying to blend in and mix in. So I recall, I think those are some of my earliest memories, my mother giving up so much for me to go to school. And as I was in, we call them A-levels, I was just finishing off my O-levels actually. So we'd written exams and I was at home waiting for results. And that holiday, my mom got sick. And initially, she was coherent. She was at home. And then after a few days, she pretty much couldn't recognize anybody except me. And I was the only one who could sort of feed her. She didn't trust anyone. She didn't want anyone to do anything for her except me. So I remember looking after my mom and trying to figure out what was wrong with her. And eventually she got admitted into hospital. And I remember on the second day just visiting. And as I was walking past the nurse's station, it's such a vivid memory. I just heard the nurses whispering, "That's the daughter of the woman with AIDS." And that, you kind of like stop mid-stride, but you kind of have to keep going because you can't believe what they've just said, but your life is just kind of stopped. Mm. But you don't really know what to do. Anyway, it was very, Anyway, so that's how I found out that my mom was HIV positive. So I hung around. I remember wanting to see the doctor. They told me that he was coming in for the evening ward round, I think it was. And so I went off and I came back, wanted to see him. And as he came in for the ward round, I was just sitting and waiting. And eventually I plucked up the courage to walk up to him to ask him what's wrong with my mom. And he just looked at me and very dismissively said, "We don't talk about such things to children." I'm 16 years old and I don't feel like I'm a child. I have been sitting here for hours waiting for you. And I'm terrified out of my mind. I just have heard offhand that she's got AIDS. And I'm hoping someone will explain to me what's going on. And is she going to die? And the way he did it, it was the most awful feeling that whatever you're going through means nothing. Maybe that's not what he meant. Maybe he was so busy, but it gutted me. And I remember standing, so it was like a glass window and looking onto her bed where she was sleeping. And I was just feeling powerless, and then suddenly just this surge of anger. And I just said to myself, I'm going to do medicine so I can learn everything I can about HIV. There's no one will talk to me about it. And she died 2 days later. And so that was how I started thinking I became aware of this whole illness and this issue about HIV and AIDS. And a couple of years later, got into medical school. I finished my A-levels, got into medical school. And in the first year of medical school, I remember my dad passing away from Kaposi sarcoma, which is also related to HIV. And so I lost both parents to HIV. And then finished off medical school. And thankfully, I had my mother's brother who was very keen to look after me. He knew about my mom's passion to have me get a good education. So when she passed on, before I finished my A-levels, he took me in and sort of paid for the rest of my school fees before the school took over and gave me a full scholarship for my final year of A-levels. But thankfully, I had family to surround me and sort of carry me through those tough times.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. With my little understanding of AIDS, I didn't realise that things could progress so quickly. Had there been any acknowledgement over the illness, to your knowledge?
Yeah, so looking back now, clearly she had been ill over some time. And because I was in boarding school, I think I missed a lot of what was going on at home. I remember the one time my dad picking me up and saying, "Oh, your mom has just had a spell." That's what he called it. So what type of a spell? She seems confused. She doesn't really. So, looking back, she had what they call AIDS dementia complex.
Okay.
When I got home, she was lucid, back at work. I think she had a bout of pneumonia at some stage, but got treated at home, was given medication, and kind of took time off from work. I don't think she was admitted into. If she was, no one told me. So looking back, it was, things were happening over time, but they were just a series of sort of relatively mild to moderate illnesses. No admissions in hospital, and they would happen mostly when I was in school. And in our culture, it's almost like don't trouble the kids with too much. No need to tell them too much information. So there's a lot that was happening at home clearly that I didn't know about.
Especially, they're putting so much energy and focus into your education.
Yes.
Did you remain living in the garage, all of that?
Yes.
So renting out the house to create a bit of income?
Yes. So that was my first Form 1 to Form 4. So we were living in that garage until I moved into my uncle's place.
What a great application of support.
Yeah. And so it was one of those where, you do have moments when you're growing up, right? You're trying to be part of the cool gang and have as normal a life as the other kids. And sometimes you forget where you're coming from, like what it's taken your family to put you where you are, right? And you kind of monkey around. I remember failing the one semester in school, but just getting a jolt back. And I'm thinking, okay, if I fail, my whole family literally has paid a price for me to come to school. And I look at all these other rich kids. I'm thinking, if they fail, they got rich daddies. They can go work for their fathers. They'll be married off to some other rich guy. I don't have that network. So if I fail, I don't have anywhere to go. So it was, in a way, it pulled me back from some of the curiosities of teenagehood and sort of saved me. Whenever I sort of tried to sort of explore a bit, it was never anything serious. You'd always sort of have that jolt and wake up call and come back. And I have to work hard. The
importance of that, I think just to have that sort of support of when I've travelled, and I haven't travelled in Africa, but I've seen in favelas, I've lived in some pretty poor communities to try and get an eyeball on, what is life like? How do these people get on? What's the attitude like? And the system of support and the community.
Yes.
And it's that bond and strength which elevates the children with hope that they'll better what they're doing now. That, in essence, is probably not dissimilar from parents in a privileged, westernised situation.
Yes.
But the desire and the passion to sort of achieve on a day-to-day basis, rolling basis, is that existent in enough households where there's so much opportunity?
I don't know. Sometimes I look at my kids and I'm thinking, do they have enough hardship to make them want to succeed? That drive that I had, it almost wasn't a choice. You just had to get down and do it and get out of there and pull your family up, And for them, that's not the equation they're working with. And I watch them kind of monkey around in PlayStation. I'm like, exams are coming up. You need to study. But anyway, that's I would never wish that upon anyone or my children, that they're kind of working against such an equation. But yeah, you do wonder sometimes.
Was that in Kenya or?
That was in Harare, yeah, in Zim, yeah.
So you were surrounded by peers that are in such a different position from you, and that's, you know, with the scholarship at the end, you know, that support from the system, that
yes,
I'm so pleased to hear that happened like that for you.
Yeah.
So there was always a bit of a guardian.
Yes, and to be honest, I always sort of look back and I think my story is so unique, and I'm given what I went through and how I was able to come through it. Wow. It's incredible. I had so much support. I had my family immediately step in, and it was an expensive school. They didn't have to continue trying to pay for me. They could have just said, look, we can't afford this. We will take you to a cheaper school. But my uncle knew how my mom had fought to have me there, and he also fought to try and keep me there. And then, of course, the system, you know, trying to get me a scholarship and allowing me to go through school. And incredibly blessed, because when I think of many children who were orphaned and some who continue to be orphaned by, you know, HIV and AIDS right now, they don't have those opportunities. They don't always have immediate family to step in and help send them to school. You know, they're moving in with grandmothers who themselves have no income, and sometimes school stops suddenly at that point, and you just have to start working or do something or get married as a young child, find, you know, get
your
married off.
choices
Yes,
basically are diminished.
they disappear immediately.
The percentage must be ridiculously high, mustn't it?
Yes.
So the fact that you are the opposite end of that percentage,
Yes.
you are the story. So it's great that you're over here.
Yeah, it is.
You're bringing something to this island now, aren't you?
Yeah.
It's fantastic. It's
thank you for having me. It's been a lovely, welcoming community. I just, we've loved our time here so far.
Well, this is home now.
Yes.
So, you've found enough things to sort of keep you here. I think in this area, you can travel around the country, and there's lots of points where there are really experienced, really wise people. But I do feel like this place, we're down the road from Silicon Valley. I know they call that in San Francisco, but that's Silicon Valley down there, or over there, or to the sideways, depending on where you're sitting. So it's drawing like the best brains and the best thinkers and innovators and solution finders to the problems that we face.
Yeah.
Dr. Kundai Chinyenze, you are one of the solutions, and I feel like it's that the passion from your own lived experience that will benefit you beyond your peers.
I don't know. Yes, I do agree that it gives me a unique perspective and a drive to what I do, but never to minimize what has brought so many different people to the work that we do. I think I've met just incredible individuals who, despite not having met or had a loss in their family due to HIV, are committed individuals who have incredible empathy and passion. And then you have those who've lost brothers and sisters. I know of people who've lost entire families, siblings, just to the disease. And we kind of all in the trenches kind of fighting alongside each other. So whilst your story is unique and is powerful, is a powerful drive for me, I'm also amazed at the individuals I work alongside. It's an incredible community.
It's great to be able to celebrate your colleagues in that way, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
You can't dwell on the past, but it sort of affects you, doesn't it, going forward?
Yes.
Do you support family back home off the back of, what you've done? Would they say, Kundai, you've done it?
Yeah. I do support family back home. I think the one thing that I wish with all my heart is if my parents were still alive and I would be able to look after them and have them see the benefits of, all their investment and hard work. So I do support extended family. My husband's family is still there, his brother. We recently lost his mom, so we were supporting her. And so it's a lot of, sort of other extended family that we are supporting as well back home.
That's just nice to know that that's there, isn't it?
Yeah.
HIV did hit our shores heavily back in the 80s. We heard from Lawrence Willard with the haemophiliacs and the tainted blood inquiry.
Yes, tainted blood.
Obviously in America, Skid Row and places like that where healthcare, education, access, acceptance to things, they're all difficult. What makes it so rampant more so in Africa?
So you do have, we talk about HIV being, now we look at it as sort of whole sort of different epidemics in different places with different faces. You have, say, in Southern Africa where it affects what we call the general population, just men and women, heterosexual communities in South Africa, for example. You do have certain pockets in other parts of Africa where, for example, you're looking at fishing communities around Lake Victoria in Uganda. You're looking at men who have sex with men who have been identified, cohorts being seen in sort of the coast of Kenya, parts of central Kenya. And you're looking at adolescent girls and young women also in Southern Africa and those parts of the world. And so different faces. But again, when you look at these different communities, they face their different sort of circumstances that sort of put them at risk. So whether you're looking at, say, fishing communities, people who've moved from other parts of the country where their families are, and they're looking to make money from fishing. And so they have left the rest of their families, their wives, and are now working in this fishing industry and constantly sort of, catching and selling fish, and you constantly have cash on you. And you may drown on the lake at any time. And so life is short. Live today whilst you can. And so a lot of sort of risk behavior that puts them at risk for HIV in those populations. And then you go to the adolescent girl and young women who's sort of facing pressure for lifestyle and maybe going out with an older man who will sort of take care of, give them some financial pieces. They call them blessers in South Africa. And it may seem easy to sort of judge the decisions of this young woman, but I think it probably takes sort of walking a day in her life to understand why she would make choices of that nature. And so very sort of different kinds of contexts and environments in Africa. And in the same way, whether you're coming here, London, you are looking at men who have sex with men, or you're going to a young black male who's also a man who has sex with other men in the US. Very different sort of issues that they face. And also then you layer on that the access to health services and the access to prevention modalities. And in its absence, it sort of compounds. You're facing all these challenges, but you don't have the adequate tools to prevent yourself, or you're being judged when you're trying to access these services. Versus, where you actually have information, you have access to the tools and are able to sort of select and choose what works for you and able to protect yourself. So again, it's, I think it's often important to remember that it's not just a thing, an African thing, or there's something for the poor. But these are sort of very real contexts, but very different nuances in different parts of the world that we have to be sensitive to. And I think in understanding those situations, that's what will help us get closer to be able to put together packages of prevention that work for these different groups of people that need help.
Let's say AIDS is rain. If we were to lift an umbrella, there'll be a few people that get cover in the middle. Towards the outside, the chances of getting a bit wet become serious, but we can't cover everyone with the same umbrella.
No, you can't.
So we need to have a personalised fitted jacket.
Yes.
Depending on where you are.
That's a good
or
analogy.
A vest.
Yes.
If it's hot.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
But it's impossible to cover everyone with an umbrella. You're never going to cover everyone, but how can you best cover as many? Change it into a piece of tarpaulin.
Yes.
Maybe.
For that environment, as long as it works and it covers as many people as possible.
You've got to cover as many people as possible.
Yes.
So the future of prevention is trying to identify the different faces.
Yes.
And how to improve the infrastructure.
Yes.
From day one.
Exactly.
Education. It's got to be at the core, isn't it?
Yes. Especially looking at these young women, having them to have a hope and a future, something to strive for, they can push for, build their resilience. I think we have come a long way from when in the 80s and the 90s when we first heard about trying to deal with this disease to where we are now. We've learned a lot, and we've done a lot to sort of remove the stigma and to educate. I must say we still have a long ways to go because, in my case, I look at it as, I had my parents, this is a married couple. And so, the stigma at the time was, okay, so who got it first and how did they get it? And I think that's about as dumb a question as it can get, because if you're just looking at the average union or marriage in this day and age, they say they face pressures of, whether it's having another relationship outside of that partnership. And no one sort of goes out and says, I'm going to seek and find this. And it could just be one encounter and you are exposed. And does that make you any sort of worse a human being? It's easy to sort of say, okay, so maybe it was a bunch of Africans and sort of maybe they maybe deserve this, or they are poor people. But these are issues that everybody is sort of facing. It has nothing to do with whether you have money or no money. If you're in a partnership in a union, those people face those challenges regardless. And so it's not about them and us. I think sometimes it's the environment that you're in and how prevalent that illness is. And so one mistake or one step outside of the social norms can have you exposed to an illness because it's so prevalent around you. It's just that, say, if you stepped outside without an umbrella, like you said, are you going to get rained on? Or you're not. Usually just people making a choice to live and love just like the rest of us. And for some, it has cost them. But yeah, I think there are people just like all of us. And I think if we all begin to look at it that way, then we kind of look jointly for a solution, not a solution for them. A solution that works for this group of people who are, why did they get it? They deserved it because they behaved this way, or because they made this choice, or because maybe they are poor and I'm not poor. So let's look for solutions for them,
I noticed you're pointing your hands away, obviously explaining like the actionable intent from certain people, from society. And I found myself more and more recently, instead of pointing a finger out, I'm pointing a finger in and thinking, well, what am I doing about it?
Yeah.
What am I going to do?
Yeah.
How can I help?
Yeah.
Don't just think, oh, well, as long as I'm all right.
Yes.
You should be thinking, well, I need those guys to be okay. Because realistically, as a one nation, we're only as strong as our weakest link, aren't we?
Yeah. Yeah.
I know that whole episode was probably the darkest I can imagine moment. I hope that's the darkest you'll ever have to go through in life. How did you get through that? What was it that was the strength behind that?
Mm-hmm. I'll be honest. I think what carried me through, at the time, was my personal faith. And also just feeling that I wasn't alone. That was so critical. I think so many people, when you're going through something, it's that sense of you feel maybe you're alone and you have very little help. I think that makes it so much worse. But being able to feel that this is terrible. This is terrible. You don't have words to describe it, but I'm not alone. I had my gran, who old, another generation, you talk kind of different languages, but you know that she loves you. You can lean on that. I have my uncle. I have my aunts. I had so many cousins. They don't always get you, but they're there. I felt God was there. And so that was critical for me. And sometimes, you are that other person who is helping out the person in the midst of a really tough time. So never underestimate what your role in helping somebody else sort of can possibly mean.
Yeah.
Even if you're just showing up with a phone call.
Answering the text.
Yeah.
Just making a smile.
Exactly.
You don't even know it sometimes, do you?
No, you don't. So like I tell you, all those people who were there in my life, whether it was my gran, my uncle, my cousins, in their own different way, they were all sort of bringing something. And collectively, they kind of got me out of that hole.
Good values, those people.
Yes.
Good values.
Yes.
Did you ever seek professional counselling or therapy? Was that something that happens within your communities?
No, that was not even available. It wasn't even I never thought of it. And in fact, you're the first person to actually ask me, and it just wasn't available, wasn't an option. It wasn't an option. And I think even with my family, we never really spoke about it, that my parents had died from HIV, AIDS. And I remember after a time I'd started speaking about it openly. It wasn't to my family, by the way. It was just everybody else. So much easier. Amongst ourselves, we never actually sat down and spoke about, your mom died of HIV. Yeah, my mom died. What does that mean for you? No, we've actually never had that conversation with any of my family members, strangely enough.
Within your experience, could you see that that level of conversation, more openness, even if it isn't within your own household, could connect,
could have helped
more and help that passage of not just education, but instant support, signposting to different strategies, techniques that people may, help to spread the word?
Yeah. I definitely think there's room and space for that. I guess I'm thinking in the context of, say, Africa and what else they're battling and the services and how you'd be able to sort of carry that additional piece onto everything else they're trying to deal with. I'm not sure it's practical in terms of service provision to say this would be available for everybody who needed it. And I think one of the unique aspects of African culture is the ability of the community to sort of rally around the injured, the wounded, the lonely ones. And in some respects, I think we kind of counsel each other in very different ways.
You already have that therapy.
Yes.
But
it may not necessarily be talking about the exact issue.
Yeah.
I think we may skirt around it. And in some family situations, I can't say no one ever. Maybe some cases they do. In mine, they didn't. That I think somehow we're built in such a way, the culture is built in such a way that it does sort of address a lot of those issues. But counsel, I think there's room for that, to allow us to more openly address what we faced. Because unlike me, I sort of came out the other side, one would say stronger. Not everybody came out that way. I know of other friends of mine who lost their parents and sort of also, in trying to make sense of what's going on and to address the pain, started drinking, and so they probably went down a path where they could have, that would have helped because they didn't have other options of dealing with the pain and addressing and trying to understand what's going on.
Yeah. It's got such a cost to everyone and everything as well, hasn't it? I always wonder about that, whether the costs are worth front-loading, like in a format of prevention. So to have that, we call it the grey area. And I'm sure every society has the same terminology for it, but that grey area is the area where I identify that everything grows from. So if you can add more colour to that area to take away the grey in every area, that surely you can't really collate the data on how much that could save you as a society. I'm a gambler in that sense. I'd gamble that it would be so beneficial financially. Obviously, I'd be thinking from the human and environment aspect the whole time, but I would imagine that it would save a lot of money and grief.
You're probably very right. And in fact, I think my gut just instinctively sort of agrees with you very strongly. I think that's an area we haven't quite.
It's too long term for most people, isn't it?
It's too long term. I mean, even prevention in general is something that a lot of people, governments, policymakers struggle with, right? Putting in so much to prevent something. Over time, I think they've begun to sort of get it. But when you get into that realm of what you're talking about, it's even harder to define. So how do you sell that? What are we preventing? How many dollars are we saving? Because that's sort of what sort of changes
the
a
math
lot
on
of.
it would be,
it's hard to calculate.
To the point where you shouldn't really waste your time. You've just got to have an arm up or arm down. Do you think that type of philosophy, that way of living, would be better than what we're doing now? Yeah,
but I think society is becoming wiser in some sense, recognizing that a lot of this support is needed in that gray area to help people to be able to cope and prevent so much down the line. what that package will look like or should look like, I think is the challenge, right?
The solution, isn't it? It's
Yes.
the identifying the solution. What's the solution?
Yes.
Hey there, it's Howie. Just interrupting really briefly, I've got a quick favour to ask. We don't run ads on the Pod Barber, but if you're finding this podcast helpful, or if you know someone who might benefit from listening to it, please take just 10 seconds to share this episode by tapping on those 3 little dots on your podcast player. From there, you can text or email a link to the show and spread the word of what we're trying to do here. That'd be great. Mick and I really appreciate your help. Okay, back to the show.
I want you to explain to me, we're talking about preventions, what PrEP is, please.
Mm-hmm. So PrEP means pre-exposure prophylaxis. And what that means is PrEP is antiretroviral based. So these are drugs that were initially developed to treat HIV. And so in this whole realm of therapy, what we call antiretroviral therapy, then sort of emerged this principle that we can use these same drugs to treat, to prevent. So if you can take them before you are actually exposed to HIV, you may actually be able to prevent infection taking hold in the first place. Mm-hmm. So PrEP means taking antiretroviral drugs and taking them before you are exposed, so that should you become exposed, then that infection will not take hold. So that's what PrEP is.
So it's a prevention.
It's a prevention.
Your parents both died from HIV. Were you ever exposed yourself to any of this?
Yes. So I actually, I remember I told you I had to look after my mom. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of, ideally, looking back after my medical training, I was like, oh my gosh. I actually was exposed in so many different ways in sort of looking after her. But I never got an opportunity to be tested at that time. I remember actually going through medical school almost convinced that I was infected. It was just a matter of time. Then I had my first HIV test, was negative. I was surprised.
Thank God.
Wow.
Yeah.
Then when I was actually practicing and I was doing my internship, I remember doing my pediatric rotation, and we had this infant that I was managing, and I was trying to inject the cannula, or just sort of inserted the cannula to put in IV infusion. And anyway, I got a blood splash in the process, and it all just kind of went into my eyes. And so I was exposed. The child was infected, and we all knew. It was during an evening call. We had a system, what we call post-exposure prophylaxis. We've just spoken about pre-exposure prophylaxis. There is, for sort of medical personnel or others, if you're exposed, that afterwards, immediately within 72 hours, you can take antiretroviral drugs, and hopefully that will prevent infection.
Okay.
And so I knew, the clock started counting, and so I needed to get hold of someone in the system, in the hospital, to get me access to the drugs. It just so happened the person at the time, and we had just started this program, and unfortunately, there was one person who was in charge that particular weekend, who was on call and had the keys to the drug cupboard. And so she had gone for a wedding and was not available. So this was on a Friday night. So she started running around trying to get me drugs, but I couldn't get hold of her. And I was actually pregnant with my first son.
Wow.
And I remember, so Saturday morning, I still hadn't gotten anything, and I called my obstetrician. I remember I just went out of the 72-hour window and was almost too late. And eventually I had an appointment with my obstetrician. He said to me, look, it was a blood splash. You went through the process of, you washed your eye. Unfortunately, you didn't have access to post-exposure prophylaxis in time. So we will just keep testing and see what happens.
So after that 72 hours, they don't then provide it.
It doesn't
doesn't work.
Yeah.
So this
at
is,
that time,
in all essence, this is a grenade of like massive anti.
Yeah, there's like a window,
Yeah.
for you to be able to actually, sort of prevent that infection. You have to have the drugs within a certain timeline. Otherwise, the chances, become less and less.
Yeah.
And it's almost, negligible after a certain time. So. So I wasn't able to get my drugs on time. Wow. So I remember just continuing to be tested and kind of holding your breath and waiting for the results. And I thankfully continued to be, I didn't become infected. So that was the one time I remember actually being exposed at work. Anyway, so thankfully, I was okay. So when about a year, I think it was about 18 months later, and I started working in there was an HIV clinic. That's another story, how I started working there. So I started working for the HIV clinics. It was the first antiretroviral. It was the first clinic to actually offer antiretroviral drugs to the general public, a government hospital, at Harare Hospital. And when I was working there, and I think by that time we kind of went back and tried to tidy up the protocols and the systems in the rest of the hospital. I guess I had a passion, of course, something had happened. Yeah. So we tidied that up.
Your career in general, working in HIV, you're the inspiration to start with, but how has that career panned out? What's your synopsis to date?
Oh, okay. So we'll start there with I was working. I was doing a stint in emergency medicine. I was working in casualty, and I remember the nurse calling me. Dr. Kundai, come. You have there's someone on the phone for you. And so I picked up the phone, and this lady says, "First, hello. I wanted to confirm this." Kundai, I was like, "Yes, please. Can you confirm for me how you spell your last name?" I'm like, I spelled it for her. And can you confirm your first name? Do you have any middle? I said, what is this about? She's like, this is for your plane ticket. I'm like, for what? She's like, you're going to San Francisco for what? Oh, for your training. In what? In HIV. I'm like, for who are you? I mean, who? I've got a job here. Oh, I'm so sorry. I think someone forgot to give you a call. You're supposed to have been called because you're going to be working with us, the Opportunistic Infections Clinic. And so to prepare you for that, we are sending you for training in HIV medicine. So that's how I got my job in HIV. I didn't apply for it.
Yeah, you weren't banging on the door.
Apply for it.
I
think I just used to bother them a lot because I used to get these a lot of HIV patients coming through casualty, and I was annoyed that why are they coming to casualty when we have an opportunistic HIV clinic? They should be going there and they should be getting good treatment. So I was always knocking on their door. You guys are just not doing. So I think in the end they just decided, let's bring her over. All this passion, let's put it to good use. So that's how I got my first job in HIV. I didn't apply for it. And my first day on the job was jumping on a plane, going to San Francisco for my training, HIV medicine. So I spent some time there and I came back. So this clinic, we started running this clinic and we had thousands and thousands of patients because we were the first clinic, and we had what was called first-line drugs as well as second-line therapy. No one else in the country had second-line therapy. So if you're on first line and if that stopped working and started failing, you had to be put on second line. And those were specialized sort of protocols at the time, and no one else had them. And so everybody in the country was then also referring the second-line protocol patients to us. So we had thousands of patients, and there were 3 doctors, and it was a bit overwhelming. And I think after almost 2 years of working there, I realized that we were trying, it's like standing at the bottom of sort of downstream and just trying to stem the flow of the river. And I was like, I can't do I'm not doing anything. So I just decided I need to go into HIV prevention because I can't keep treating. There's just so many people, and I need to do more to help. So I went into HIV prevention research. I actually started in microbicides research in Zimbabwe. I started working with an institution there. And then after some time there, we moved to Nairobi. And then I took a bit of a hiatus. I came here to actually do my master's. I was at Leeds University. And then went back, and then I got my first job in HIV vaccine prevention. That was with IAVI. And that was about 10 years ago. So that's how I've been working in HIV vaccine.
It found you.
It found me.
And then you forged a path through it.
I forged a path through it, yes. In fact, when I got to Nairobi, I was looking for work in microbicides research, but there was not much going on, and I just bumped into this sort of vaccine group. I was like, well, I don't know much about vaccines, but it's HIV. Let's give it a shot, and I loved it. So I'm still there. So my company, we started off in HIV vaccines, but we've sort of expanded to other disease areas, including TB. Emerging infectious diseases, like Lassa fever and Marburg, And also sort of COVID, we're also developing a COVID vaccine. So that's pretty much the work I do. I love it. I think I just...
the prevention.
Yes, that's really critical.
It's got to be the key, isn't it? And you have to pioneer. You can take on the workload, I suppose, of others that have been there before you, but it's just a baton pass. It's right now, let's put this energy onto it. Let's use this latest technology. Let's see what Silicon Valley are doing.
Yeah.
Collate with the greatest brains and what have you. And that's what's brought you to this area.
Yes.
I can't believe that AIDS is still hanging around when it's got you to fight. I'd have given up a long time ago. Why is it taking so long?
Oh, the HIV is a very complex virus. If you sort of to compare it to COVID or SARS-CoV-2 or any of the flu viruses is far much more complex. And its rate of mutation and change is so incredible. Just even in the single individual, when it infects one person, and just the diversity of strains that you can find in that one individual, let alone when it's passed on and then in different regions of the world. So it has been a scientific challenge, sort of finding a vaccine that is able to sort of first neutralize or prevent infection from one strain, let alone the multiple strains circulating globally. So that's been a challenge. I mean, drugs-wise and, therapies, we've made a lot of progress in sort of, finding appropriate therapies and getting better at it with time. But in terms of finding vaccines, that has been far more challenging.
We just need to reduce the risk. It's not. Are we going to get rid of AIDS? Do you see an end to it? Or is it more about reduce the risk and get better infrastructure for the therapy in the council afterwards?
Yes, you aim to reduce the risk as best as you can. The challenge is it's all sort of dependent on human behavior. And whenever you're dealing with something that's highly dependent on human behavior, it's very challenging. There's so many factors that you can't control about our human behavior.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Talking about vaccines and stuff, currently, we really look at COVID and we're looking at the vaccination process, and it's seemingly holding up. Are you really happy with the results? Is the part that you're working on in similar to what we're seeing now, or are you further down the line with an alternative?
So we're very early in the process, and so I think probably early on too much to even talk about it per se. But I think in the broader field, in terms of COVID vaccines, I think it's been amazing progress. I mean, I've seen things unprecedented. I think the speed of being able to actually develop a vaccine, I think it's sort of making our heads spin and sort of opening our eyes to new potentials. And we could actually do this and apply this to ultimately improve the process for other vaccines going forward. So great learnings from the COVID space. And I think one of the most amazing pieces was the way governments and sort of big pharmaceutical companies, academic organizations were able to just come together and invest so much towards this, this is a common enemy. And look what happened in such a short space of time when so many groups were working together, committed with huge investments of money. I think that was a game changer, the amount of money that was poured into COVID vaccine research. And the limits that were sort of removed in terms of the data around the COVID virus, the SARS-CoV-2, the sequences, just being able to share that openly and very quickly and have people begin to develop vaccines against that because they understood the virus very quickly. In the past, in other disease areas, sort of people are working in silos and also trying to make a career for themselves, being the first to understand this.
Yeah.
And it's not so publicly available. But the fact that for COVID, we removed all those restrictions. I mean, publications were coming out, sequences were being shared around the globe. It was really inspiring. In fact, what happened during COVID, how the scientific field was able to sort of work together. Yes, probably there were some inefficiencies here and there, but I think we did a lot of things right.
Yeah. So mass vaccination globally without border is what we need.
Yes.
Clearly the financials are there.
Oh, yes. We're not going to lie to ourselves, yes.
Yeah, so the financials are there.
Lift.
But how's it going to be possible to vaccinate Africa? India and some of these Asian areas that their red tape, their discipline to do these things are not the same.
It takes a lot of sort of, I think, many disciplines and groups coming together to try and figure this out. It's not just one group or one government to try and figure out how to help. So if you look at, say, I think there are small steps that governments can take. We have vaccines for our populations where there's excess, or what can we spare and donate and help, right? But beyond that, because I think that's probably a drop in the ocean, beyond that, you need very clear mechanisms of supporting the supply chain to ensure that not only at the point of manufacturing do you have enough supply for global supply, because this is not about
and demographically
regional.
As well. You need the factories, you need the you need the people trained, you need jobs.
So how do you get that the vaccines to be manufactured and mass produced fast enough and quickly for there to be enough for everybody?
Yeah, it can't be sat on the Suez Canal getting blocked up for 2 months, can it?
And then when you have those vaccines, which are the ones that are appropriate for certain health systems, for example, if you're looking at your Pfizers and your Modernas, super frozen, minus 80 degrees or minus 60 or even minus 20, you going to Africa, you can only do so much, especially in places where there are challenges in electricity supply. And so you may have to go with, say, maybe your J&J types of vaccines or AstraZeneca. So that's the value of having a range of options, right?
Yeah.
And then your J&J is one dose. So, it works perfectly for certain regions and health systems. That may be ideal. At the same time, you're looking at the strain coverage and being able to adapt your vaccines so that they can have inserts that will cover for the variants that are emerging. So how quickly can you adapt your vaccines? Your mRNA platforms, like your Pfizer and your Modernas, will be very good at that because they can do that quickly. The others takes a bit more time to build that up in terms of adjusting to new variants, but a lot can be done. But you have to have very clear systems that allow for payment and supply, because at the end of the day, they do need to be paid for, and they have to be mechanisms that have, like the COVAX. We hear of how UNICEF has come together with groups like a Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Initiative, CEPI, and so they put together significant investment in terms of dollars in supply chains, because now how do you get the vaccines there? And once they are there, how do they get rolled out? Then there's a whole aspect of communications, dealing with the public perception and understanding, dealing with vaccine hesitancy. When you're just listening to it, you can tell you're looking at money guys, you're looking at communications guys, you're looking at supply chain people. It's a huge network of people, the policymakers. So there's a lot that needs to be done.
It can't be done overnight. It
can't be done overnight.
It needs to be recognised as well, doesn't it? Because it's recognising that we're still in the middle of this.
Yes. And we have these wake-up moments as a world. I hope that the wake-up moments are not just periodic and we go back to sleep again. We can't afford to go back to sleep after COVID. On the continent of Africa, there's very little manufacturing of vaccines going on. So they're very sort of vulnerable in terms of their supply chain, relying on what's coming from elsewhere. And so they can control movement and availability in their region, because you're kind of waiting for someone to say, oh, now we have some left over for you. So it is critical to invest in manufacturing on the continent. Yes, it's not something that you start now, may not be immediately available in the next 2 years or so, but it will take time and investment, but it's worthwhile, because I think we're in a new era of emerging pathogens, and it's not just about equipping Africa to produce for their own. Ultimately, when you're talking about global pandemics, these factories that are global will work together to ensure global supply. So you had India, being able to supply other parts of the world outside of India. And I think people need to have a vision that's beyond that. That is not just about, making sure Africa has factories to supply for Africa. But once you have that network of factories, if things like this keep hitting the world in future, you have networks of manufacturing that can ensure global supply, not just regional supply, but global supply, just supporting that entire network.
It could be that African countries need to supply the UK.
Yes.
We could be in some format of problem. You expect the unexpected, So preparedness.
As COVID has taught us.
Preparedness, one of the lessons learned.
Of course.
Vaccines help.
Yeah.
What would your message be to an anti-vaxxer?
I would never assume that an anti-vaxxer, that they're all the same, that they're coming from the same place and that they're being driven by the same reasons to be against vaccines. I can't say I would have one thing to say. What I would say is why. I would want to understand why. Where are they coming from? And I think that's really critical for the world to understand, that it's not just about creating messages for the anti-vaxxers. It's important to listen to their concerns and also understand that it's not categorized and say, I just lump everybody into the bucket of anti-vaxxers. I think there's significant differences. There are people who are wanting to wait and to understand more before they take the vaccines. They have concerns. So what are those concerns and how can we help them get over those? And if they choose to say, I still don't want the vaccine afterwards, okay. Then there's, of course, a group that's extreme, really against vaccines and wanting to encourage and bring in other people to be in that fold of just going against vaccines as a whole. One thing I do know is history, not opinion, not emotions. History and facts have shown us that vaccinations or vaccines are an effective and powerful public health tool, especially in the face of infectious disease. And that's the one tool that has really been effective in controlling outbreaks of infections all over the world. We are on the brink of eradicating polio, smallpox. We see pictures and images. And how did we get there? Vaccination. Measles was a common thing in the early 1900s, and in the 1980s it was a problem. But we come to a place where vaccines are able to bring a level of control, and we don't see much of that. In fact, when I did my medical training, I saw very few measles cases, very few, even in Africa, very few, because of vaccination. So that is fact. That is what history has taught us, and so we can't ignore that. Having said that, it is important to ensure that the process for developing vaccines continues to be safe, continues to be driven by science, and be as transparent as possible, and to be able to retain fidelity to ensuring safe and effective tools that are accessible to as many people as possible. So those are the things that I will continue to fight for. And, the work that I do is I work in clinical trials where we test these products in people. And it's really critical that you go through the full stages, no shortcuts of testing in a small number of people at first, having obtained the appropriate data in the preclinical stage to inform whether you can now go into people, because you have to have a certain safety signal, right, to say, can you go in people? You get that, you go small numbers of people and make sure you're really looking rigorously at that data, whether it's safe before you proceed. And if that product, if you see any concerning signals, you kill the product or you go back and modify it so that it's, it works better. People do whole years of studying to understand how to do this. We are well regulated and we do it properly. So that is critical. And I think those are some of the sides that probably some people don't understand. They think maybe a vaccine is just developed in a lab somewhere and then you just kind of put it in a vial and then you just mass roll it out. Without enough data, that's just not how it works. There's a lot of work that has gone into before you can say to people, this product is safe. And even after it's licensed, continuing to monitor the signals that are coming through about its safety and inform people as you go along.
You're always going to keep on researching as the information's coming in. You're always working on it. Innovation in the science and medical field is massive, and that's why people are going and getting scholarships, and we're testing these brains, we're making them bigger and better, and we're celebrating listening to yours working in the Pod Barber show today. You're such a determined mother and inspiring influence. What would you say would be the lessons that you want to impart on your sons now?
I guess as a mother, you want to protect your children from the tough aspects of life, from hardship. You want it to be good. You want them to have happy memories of growing up in childhood. The only lesson, I think, the one key thing that I guess my life has taught me is don't be afraid of the tough times. They are good for you. They are good for you. They are hard, but you can make it through most of them. People around you are so valuable and so needed. Build a network of people around you. You know, whether it's colleagues at work, whether it's around your house, your neighbors, it's your family, your siblings. Just make those relationships work, even no matter how difficult it is. Because you will need those very different networks to help you go through the tough times, because you won't be able to go through them by yourself. But just don't be afraid of those tough times. Embrace them.
Powerful woman that you are, inspiring woman that you are. Do you see a shift now to sort of empower and better educate women?
There is definitely a shift. I think also just being able to see these examples of women ahead of you, right? I have amazing women that I admire and I look at, and I see what they have done with their lives despite challenges, and being able to have families and children and still be able to have careers, right? So it is inspiring, and that, I think, gives hope to those who are looking on ahead. But yeah, more work does need to be done. I think it's really critical to advance the cause for women and show them that, you know, they can take on the sciences and do that and actually enjoy it. But ultimately, for me, it's not so much, okay, more women in science. I'm saying more women in the places they want to be in.
Yeah, not to be shoehorned.
Yes, and even if that place they want to be in is as a housewife and just, you know, giving up their career and raising their children, and that's where their heart is, let's make it happen for them. If the heart is, I want to try and do as best as I can in both worlds, have my career and have the children as well, let's do the best we can. How can we make, whether it's maternity or childcare, work for them so that they can also make things work in multiple worlds? But it's really critical to support women to be where they want to be, not where they have to be.
The only way to do that, I think, is the masses start talking more openly.
Yeah.
Conversation's a cure.
Conversation's part of it.
Nothing starts without it.
Yes.
Nothing happens without it.
Yes. It's critical. It is needed. And it does open up our minds to other realities, right? Because when you sit and listen to all these different contexts and realities and challenges, you're like, oh my gosh, I never knew. I didn't know about this. And it's critical. I love what you're doing, and just bringing people to different and unusual conversations that they wouldn't typically sort of bump into at the dinner table or at that party. But it's you need that exposure to it. Opens up a whole new world.
It's because it's personable.
Yes.
It's
real.
Yeah, and there's an element of
human story behind it.
Yeah, I think we get lost in a headline and a paragraph. I think we've been processed to be a certain way. I think we're all lemmings.
Yeah.
I've been spoiled. I've been talking all my life. I work as a barber, and like I always say, this area is fantastic for the diversity of quality human beings.
Right?
Yeah, really good quality human beings.
Yeah, there's so many amazing people out there. Talk to them, talk about them. I think that's what a lot of people need to see and hear.
I've always said it. Why don't people want to listen to the story of hope and positivity? Because, man, that's a really good story.
Yes.
Like, I'm always attracted to that story as opposed to the story of lack of discipline, over-sexualization.
Yes.
And it lowers the bar of where people are happy to be. And I think as a people, I think we're becoming more tolerant, but we're letting slip our discipline to identify with that.
Yes.
If we can sit back and think, well, what do I want from my kids moving forward? Now that I'm more sensible, now that I'm older, okay, well, I want them to be compassionate, empathetic.
Yes.
I want them to be healthy, happy.
Yeah.
I want them to be able to look at someone else and their situation and think, oh, those people need help.
Yeah.
Those people are not fortunate enough, so I must be grateful.
Yes.
And once I'm full of gratefulness, I'm going to put some of that energy over here.
Yeah.
Help those guys out.
Yeah.
And in that way, you start to pay things forward. You start to see a few changes, don't you? And you and it's very small, but that's on the human experience, and that can get us through. But to give a little bit of time to someone next to you and just ask them if they'd give a fraction of that forward.
Yeah. I always, one of the things that I sort of struggle as a parent is how do I teach my children and continue to teach them just kindness, goodness. Those are some of the key things. And just like you're talking about individuals and people and the heroes amongst us, they live amongst us. They're everywhere. And they just have real stories. And if you take time to just pay attention and listen, and not listen to the ones who are making the most noise, and just being able to appreciate that beauty that's really in the midst of us. Teaching our children to hear the quieter voices and the more valuable voices. That's a question I keep asking myself. How well am I doing there?
How do you drown out the noise?
How do you drown out the noise?
Dr. Kundai Chinyenze, how do people follow you or tune in to any of the other things that you may well have been on, or understand better what you do, or research you, or geek out if they want to know more about you because you're so interesting? Where can they find you?
So this is where I expose my old self and my old soul and my absence on social media. I have a Facebook account, which I visit once a year. I do not have a Twitter account. So I don't know if I'm the best person to try and sort of understand what I do. But yeah, you can check out a lot of the work that we do on the IAVI website, the work that we are doing in the vaccine space. Yeah, and listening to the Pod Barber on the podcast.
Cool. Look, before we conclude what has been an amazing chat, I always ask a question and we always get different answers. And I know you haven't listened to a full podcast yet, because you're so busy saving the world. So my question is, sex, drugs or rock and roll? And it's my curveball question. And you can talk about any of those categories in any fashion that you wish, as it comes to you.
Sex.
Go on.
Sex is great. And we need to equip and allow humanity to have sex in a safe way. And allow them to enjoy it. That's probably all I can say.
I think coming from your field of expertise, I think that's perfect. I've got to thank you for coming on today. And I know that you've particularly booked a holiday for this moment. It was so important for you to have it. This is your first few hours of your holiday, isn't it?
Yes.
Spent on the Pod Barber, championing the chat, and you'll be educating our listeners, and they'll love to meet you and your story. And it stands the test of time. We've covered so many subjects, and I can't thank you enough. On that note, peace, love, and power to your day.
Thanks, Mick. Same to you. It was a pleasure being here with you.
The Pod Barber is a That Media and Design production, with Mickey at the mic and Howie at the controls. If you've been affected by any of the topics in this show, you can find more helpful information on the episode's page at thepodbarber.com and search The Pod Barber on social, and let's get connected.